So now that we have our parent and subcomponent connected, and the subcomponent is notifying back the parent about their current value, and we are logging this, what we now want to do is we want also to enable the subcomponent to tell the parent about how to notify them back. So if a parent wants to say to the subcomponent, hey, update yourself to that particular value, we want to enable this. So how do we do this? Let's first change something. Here, we want to define a function, listen, which is a function that a parent can call when they want to notify the subcomponent. So this listen, so when the subcomponent range slider is listening to this function, it will receive a message and it will say, okay, so what is in this message? We have a type and we have data. And then it can check if the type is update, for example. Again, update, but we can call it however we want. If the type is update, then update yourself. So do the input value and set it to whatever data I sent you. Okay? But how do we get this function, this listen function, back to the parent? We basically have to define a new function here, and we will call it a protocol, because we are defining like communication between both components. So the protocol function is the function that we will pass when we create a subcomponent. So instead of listen, we will now pass to both of the subcomponents a protocol. And then they receive the protocol and they can call it. So if subcomponent calls a protocol and it gives the function listen as an argument, then here on the other side in the parent component we can get this listen function. But subcomponent still needs access to the notify. So how do we do that? So basically when the subcomponent calls the protocol, gives it its own listen function, it should also receive back a notify function. So this is what we want. So we, inside of this function protocol, have to return the listen. So this is not a listen, this is a notify. So this, we can also rename it and say notify subcomponent. This is the function that we are passing here. So this is how you notify a subcomponent, and this is the listen function from the main component, so that we could, for example, call this notify parent. This is how you can then notify back a parent. But I will just call it notify, and here also notify, but just so that you know that here we are basically notifying a subcomponent, and here with this notify we are notifying back a parent. So once again, subcomponent receives a protocol, it calls this protocol and gives it a listen function so that the parent receives this notify function so that they can notify back their subcomponent, but it also sends or returns a listen function so that the subcomponent can notify the parent. So this is the first step. Now let's do the same also for the other subcomponent. So input integer also receives a protocol. It calls this protocol protocol and gives it a listen function and receives back a notify function. But we also have to define a listen function, and we can just copy it because it's going to be the same. So listen to the message. When the message arrives, we check if the type is update, and if it is, we update ourselves to the data that we received as a subcomponent. So this is this. So let's see if this works already. So I'm updating, but nothing happens. First of all, I didn't save this. Okay. Nothing happens here because we have to change another thing. So the first time we call the protocol, we should also say who we are. So we will also send a little message. And in this message, it's going to be an object. We will just send for now just one thing, and we will say, this is coming from, and we give our name. The same here. So next to the protocol, we also send a message, an object with another message, but a message basically with one value, which is telling who we are, our name. And then when we initialize this protocol, we also say that the state, current state for this from is gonna be value, and we just set it to 0. We don't have to check whenever we get a message, whenever we get a new message from the subcomponent. We don't have to check if there is a state already, because we know that there is a state for this particular component, because the first time the protocol was called, we initialized it with value 0. And then each time we receive a message, we can just update the state from and set the value to data. And we have to pass another thing here. So not just the name, we also have to, we pass just this, but we have to here on this side, when we receive it, we set the value to 0, and we have to also store the notify function so that we then, when we want to notify a certain subcomponent, we know how to find it. We just go to state and the name, and then we can find what is the value of that particular subcomponent and how to notify that particular component. We have then basically access to that notify function. From is not defined, of course, because we didn't make this yet. So when we call a protocol, we get from and we get listen. So we get a message and we get notify. And this message is containing from. And now this should work. Okay.